Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this evening, talking about queens and queen management. I'm Shane Gebauer with BrushyMtnBeeFarm, and with us this evening we have Dr. Larry Connor coming back for a series in which we've been doing with him. Thanks for joining us again, Larry. It's always a pleasure to have you with us, and we're looking forward.
Always a pleasure to be here, Shane.
We have just a couple of questions for you, the audience, tuning in this evening before we turn Larry loose. This is just going to help guide him this evening, provide a little information about what you bring to tonight's conversation. So let me just launch a couple of questions here. We'll go through these fairly quickly. Let me show you this one. Do you have trouble finding the queen? If you would, just take a second to respond to this one. We're going to go fairly quickly here because we've got 4 questions. This is the first of 4. So I'm going to close this poll in 3, 2, 1, and I'm closing the poll. And let me just quickly share those results. So we've got 64% that say they can rather that they do have trouble finding the queen. Let me quickly just launch the next question. Have you successfully requeened a colony? Go ahead and, if you would, just take a second here to respond to this one, and we'll go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, 1, 0, closing this poll. And quickly sharing those results. So 55% say they have successfully requeened a colony. All right. We're going to just keep on trucking with these questions. And here's the next one. Can you recognize a drone-laying queen? Just go ahead and, if you would, respond to this question rather. We'll close this poll in 3, 2, 1. 0, going ahead and closing this poll, and we have 74% say that they cannot. All right, that's good. And one last question. Sorry to bombard you all with these questions, but it'll be useful for our conversation, I think. So here's the last one. Can you recognize a colony with laying workers? Go ahead and respond to this one, and we'll close the poll in 3, 2, 1, and I'm closing it and sharing this one. So 52% can recognize laying workers, but fairly close there. All right, we appreciate that. With all that said, I'm going to turn it over to Larry. There will be an opportunity at the end to have a question and answer period. There should be a question panel that's opened on the right side of your screen. You can type questions in there, but we will save them towards the tail end of the presentation. Larry, thanks again for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shane. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with folks a little bit about queens. If you get any sound effects in the background, we're about to get some major thunderstorms here in Michigan, so I'm inside, so I don't have to worry too much about getting wet, but you know, you never know what you're going to get for the sound effects as a big boom comes through. Appreciate those comments about the 4 questions. I never know quite how to pitch a particular talk, so this helps me a great deal. I was really interested in the fact that many of you had not had 26% are successful at recognizing a drone-laying queen versus 74 that cannot. But you can recognize laying workers, so I guess that's a step in the right direction. It's not easy, and we're going to talk about some of these things as we get into all this tonight, so we'll see exactly what we're doing and how we're approaching this. So remember how to do all this stuff. I want to talk a little about natural cell production. I'm talking about queen rearing so much as I am talking about how the bees do natural queen cell production, and kind of lay a baseline for what we're doing. And I suspect that some of you in the southern areas, and we will soon be seeing a lot of queen cells in the colonies that survive the winter. And traditionally, we look underneath the frames for queen cells, and you can see, I don't know if my cursor goes over here, you can see this one that seems to be a drawn-out cell. There may be another one there, but certainly a queen cup. These are probably drone cells. I don't think they're queen cells. But this is an indicator that, you know, these bees are building up in strength. You can see this is a new hive with brand new equipment, maybe from last year. Who knows? Here's another one with queen cells. One, this is a second and a third one here. This one's probably a little more mature. It's got a darker opening or tip. This is a little bit lighter. You can kind of gauge them a little bit. There may be, this seems to be a cup here, but the rest of these are drones, and more drones over here, another cup over on the right-hand side, another cup here. And you can see that's a fairly solid frame of worker brood. Looks like a medium equipment. And this would be a good indicator of this colony is getting ready to swarm, or unfortunately it may already have swarmed at this point. And one of the things that I use as an indicator on whether a colony has swarmed or not is the number of bees on the brood frames. And if you look at this, you see there's a lot of real estate on that brood frame that is not covered by bees. Now that could be due to two things. One is the beekeeper effect, working this colony, manipulating the colony, and disturbing things. But the other thing is that bees will leave brood frames when they start to get too hot, so it's a way of kind of taking the heat off the frames. So this is another factor you have to be concerned about. But what this tells me, when we look at a frame with all this sealed worker brood and we see sealed queen cells, this is an indication of what bees will instinctively do, and that is start this swarm behavior. And so these queen cells are an indicator. I think in this case this colony has already had at least one swarm leave the hive, so that's kind of confusing. The other condition, or one of the conditions you see then in cell production, is of course supersedure. And supersedure is, if you will, the opposite behavior. The behaviors, the mechanism seems to be about the same, but here's a queen cell on the face of the comb, and you see the brood cells there. It's a little bit spotty. That's an indicator perhaps the bees aren't doing, the queen isn't doing quite as well. She may be losing some of her viability. But the reduction in the amount of brood that you see here is a pretty good indicator that this colony is failing. And I just use a ballpark figure that when you got about half the brood area that you should have in a strong colony, all things being equal between colonies, this is a good indicator that these bees are in the process of superseding. And so you get supersedure any time of the year. Of course, they can only get successful mating when there's plenty of drones around, but they can produce a queen cell like this anytime they have eggs and larvae to pick from and actually do the cell production. So keep that in mind. You see a cell like this in April for North America, that's fine. You see this in October, it means that colony's in big trouble and you're probably going to lose, or you will lose it. I don't think there's any way, unless you're in a really warm location, that they're going to have the drones available for mating to whatever queen comes out of this. So just looking at the difference here, you can see the difference between that one and the kind of flipping around here. I don't know what's going on. So this is typical of swarming, and whoop, going the wrong way here. And then typical of swarming, typical of supersedure. So here's another colony that seems to be typical of what you'd expect for supersedure. This colony appears to be on a nectar flow. There may be a cell that has been torn down over on the left-hand side. I'm not sure what that white is. It looks like royal jelly to me. And quite frankly, I don't remember when I took the photo. But you've got these two queen cells here at the bottom on the edge of the queen, the brood pattern. And this, again, would be a pretty good indicator of a supersedure, queen replacement behavior. Even though those cells are toward the bottom of the frame, you can't go 100% with where the cells are as an indicator of what the bees are in the process of doing. Now, what's this mean to you as a beekeeper? Well, it means don't get crazy in cutting out queen cells, because if you cut out all the superseder queen cells in a colony, you've just killed the colony, unless you've got plans to bring in another queen from somewhere else. So this is a cautionary tale for you to keep in mind, that you get too excited. On the other hand, if you had queen cells like this on 2 or 3 colonies or frames in a colony that had enough bees, you could pull a frame of brood and bees out of this colony. You take all the brood away and make up nukes at this time of year for many of us, and add more bees, more brood from another colony, and give them a new queen, or let these queen cells mature. So those are your options, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It really depends on you and how you want to operate. Well, now, if I had a colony like this, and I see some queen cells, and you see 3 there, and you see this very spotty brood pattern, I don't think there's any disease involved, but you always have to ask the question. You see the lower frame, there's part of the frame, you see some pollen that's pretty dark. It's covered with honey, so it's darkened a bit. And you'd expect to see worker bees out of here, but you always want to check and make sure you don't have an occasional drone being produced. Some of these may qualify as bullet-shaped brood, which would indicate that there's a boy bee developing in there instead of a worker. These cells have probably been adapted. They are from a queen cup. The queen probably laid that egg in those cells, in this cell and this one over here. Workers didn't move it, but it's an indicator that queen is really failing, and she's not doing very well. And here's a really, unusual or extreme example. Here's a colony that's not getting much nectar, but certainly getting a lot of pollen. It looks like there's a queen cell over here on the left-hand side in an area of brood in the center. I think it's worker brood, but you better check and make sure that that's actually worker brood and not a patch of solid drone brood. So again, when you see colonies like this, you need to deal with this in some positive way. And one would be to add bees, add a new queen, and try to build this colony back up. Another approach would be to get out a piece of newspaper and stack this colony on a strong colony so that you don't lose the bees and the equipment. Let the bees emerge out of this frame, and maybe this is one of those frames you want to call out this year in terms of the quality of the frame itself, because it's dark. It's got maybe some mouse damage. It's never done well. So here's a queen cell here, maybe a cup here, and a pretty miserable brood pattern. So as you work through these your colonies, it's always good to work with somebody, if you're a new beekeeper, who's got a little more experience than you do, hopefully good experiences, so they can look at this and tell, well, it looks like we've got some supersedure going on here. You got a queen cup, you got a queen cell, probably not swarming, but you have an idea of you need to figure out what you're doing here. Well, the third instinct, of course, for cell production is the emergency response. And here's a frame from Dewey Caron. We've been working hard on getting the revision of his textbook done. And here's a frame that the queen was taken out, and these were all eggs and larvae. And you can see that the bees have started dozens and dozens of queen cells on this frame. Now, they won't finish them all because there seems to be some system of, some people say competition, some people say just a little selection going on here. But the colonies like this are always ones you have to watch, because if something's happened to this queen, or you pulled the queen out to move her somewhere else and forgot to come back, or you set up an observation hive and you come back and here, so the bees are off the frame. We don't know how many bees are really on that frame. If that's the number of bees in this colony, that's pretty unusual, but you're in big trouble, aren't you? So we have to watch these colonies when they're using this emergency response and how they're going to approach the replacement. Queen cups, many people are confused by queen cups. Queen cups are going to be in your colonies fairly soon after you install them. They're queen cups in a colony year-round. And when I'm looking at queen cups, I look for white wax on the edge, new wax, they're drawing it out. This may be some new wax here. And of course, if it's occupied with a larvae, egg or a larvae, now it's no longer a cup, it's a queen cell. So here's some queen cells from the queen ring operation. These are the plastic JCBZ cups from my queen ring. And when you look at these queen cells, you've got to remember that whether they're from you as a beekeeper or they're from what the bees are doing, there's a lot of biology going on around those queen cells. And this artificial cell kind of shows you several things. First of all, they don't seem to have any resistance to using these plastic cells. And we moved a larvae in here. We took a 12-hour larvae and transferred it into the bottom of the cell. Sometimes we use royal jelly, but usually we don't. But we keep that all moist and then put it right into a starter colony. And that's part of the queen ring process, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time with tonight. And but we have worker bees that are around this cell, and they're doing several things. First of all, we will assume that this bee with her head in is actually a nurse bee, and she's adding royal jelly to the mass of royal jelly that's already there. So she's feeding that queen larvae. Other bees may be on here, and some of them may be part of the team that helps build the wax that goes into that cell production. They may be part of the team that helps monitor the temperature of the queen cell. Queen cells are produced generally in one of the warmest areas, the brood nest, and this speeds development of the queen. It also makes it easier to manipulate that wax. So here are a couple of queen cells that we produced. You can see that there's royal jelly at the base of the cell that the bees have provisioned. So they've got that. You can see the length of the cell, which may or may not be an indicator of how good a queen you'll get. I tend to think that if you have big cells, you'll get bigger queens. But certainly the amount of royal jelly you have available when the cells are sealed is a good indicator that this queen is going to be well fed. And I mention this because I think a lot of us are buying queens from southern states, from different areas of the country, and we have to watch what they're dealing with in terms of their weather. And if they've had a cold snap or they've had a period of rainy weather, you'd expect those queen cells to be pretty poor. And while I raise queen cells, and after the last couple of years, I'm not going to start until our weather improves considerably, because there's no point. There's no point in raising poor queens. They have to be well fed, and while you can supplement with artificial diets, man, I love to have natural food coming in and for queen rearing. Also, if they're being held back by other conditions, that's going to affect your drone population. So you don't want to have these virgins produced and nobody to mate with. I think this is the photo from my book on queen rearing essentials, and this is from Dave Mix's operation down in Groveland, Florida. I just spoke to Dave this week, and busy guy, raising queen cells 7 days a week this time of year. And they graft every day, and they're moving the bees into their starter-finisher colonies. Lots of bees. The cells are large. These are using these are plastic, but they dip them in wax, so they look like they're wax. You can still get an indicator of the amount of royal jelly. These are well fed. He does both natural food and, of course, a lot of supplemental feeding that he's worked out over a period of years. But you want to have these really nice-looking cells. Now, when you get into queen rearing, and if you buy queen cells from anybody, temperature is pretty important. And here's a simple incubator. Somebody is rigged up with a thermostat, a light bulb, a thermometer, and these are cells that have come out of the cell builder colony, their cell finisher colony, brought in for sale to local beekeepers. So if they brought them in today, they need to sell them today or tomorrow morning, because tomorrow afternoon those cells are going to start emerging. Those queens will get out. One queen gets out early, she'll go through and she'll chew a hole in every one of those cells and sting every queen, and you lose them all. So it's pretty risky. Some people use cages as a result. This is the back of Dave Mix's operation, and you see he brings in the frames, brushes off the bees very carefully, and doesn't want to damage the tips of any of those cells. Brings them in and maintains them in an incubator. I'm not too sure the whole setup. Looks like he's got 2 thermometers here at the bottom. He's got a heat source. He's probably got a moisture source in there. So it's basically, you know, a giant chicken incubator or something he's modified. So you've got that. And then the different colors on those frames may indicate different lines of queens or some way of identifying who's who. So just another view of the same thing. And I just want you to get a feeling for what a good queen rearing operation is doing. Not that other people don't have, but you want to have these nice cells. You notice some have little angles to them. That's probably because the bees are so crowded in there, and the bees are kind of fighting over space. Well, those queen cells can then be harvested and put into trays like this, and then commercial and large beekeepers are able to stop by and pick up these queen cells. You can also have them shipped, but these are just like little delivery trays for these queen cells just stacked up in a row in an incubator. I'm just impressed with this whole setup. So you can see the names of some of the customers, and they'd be identified by the type of bees. You can also put those queen cells into a plastic cell protector that fits into a bar. You get 2 rows there, and then these can be shipped with live bees on them to you overnight. So I'm sure he's booked out for the year, but in your own operation, then you may have those frames or those queen cells in an insulated box. And David and his family just take these hand warmers and activate a couple of them, put them in there with a damp towel, and that's how they move cells from the queen rearing operation or the incubator to the yard where they're going to do natural mating. And good idea, good suggestion. A lot of the books say, oh, the cells that can withstand some chilling, but if you're really careful about it, you don't let your queen cells chill at all. And I think some of the problems we see with queen quality may be related to chilling. Well, here's a great bee yard down in West Virginia. I did a workshop down there a couple of years ago. Great group of beekeepers of the West Virginia queen breeding group that Judge Dan O'Hanlon has been operating with. And this beekeeper, one of the bee inspectors in the state, he turned, I think his kids or grandkids over and let them paint up the hives, so they're all a little bit different. And doing that for orientation, for mating accuracy. These are relatively small mating nukes that you would be using if you wanted to make queens from your cells, purchased cells, cells from those supersedure cells that you saw, or queen cells from swarming. So you can set these up and have a little fun, try to produce extra queens. It always is in a beekeeper's best interest to have a few extra queens on hand rather than be short on queens. Here, well, I'm too fast or it's too slow here. Here are some mating nukes out in California, and they've started setting these up the first week of March most years, and they produce, this particular operation is at Conan's. They would set up 1,500 of these every other day during the March setup period. These are kept in a cool, shaded room with ventilators in there with big fans that move a lot of air in. And these bees are set up so that you have about a cup full of bees. You've got frames in there, and you've got a feeder in there, and you have a ripe queen cell. And they leave them in this setup for 36 hours or so. So you set up the day, date today being, what, this is Wednesday, so on Friday these would go out to the bee yard, be put out in the yard, and then Friday evening they'd be opened up. And why do they do that? Well, that virgin queen will emerge. She can't get out of this box because there's if you look over here, these little turnbuckle type arrangements that cover up the entrance. And so here's a way of getting a lot of queens produced in a short time period. High tech, that's a rubber band around the box. And the biggest problem that we're now seeing with this small size nuke is, of course, small hive beetles, because unless you're applying some sort of insecticide to control the small hive beetles, you're going to have issues. Well, these boxes are designed to get, oh, by the way, they actually use a spam can, so I call them spam nukes. Not electronic spam, but it's a small unit. You get a lot of queen mating in a short time period. You're probably going to get 1 or 2 cycles out of these boxes, and then they're just not going to survive everything else going on in your operation. So a larger type of mating nuke would be one that's got a half frame or even a full frame of brood and bees. And these can be maintained, if you do it right, throughout the entire season. And I've really been, this is in California again, in Pat Heikem's setup. And, you know, Pat uses the bees that come right out of the almonds for pollination. And he sets up these mating nukes. And unfortunately, I don't have a shot inside. But I was real impressed when I visited with Fred Rossman 2 years ago now. Fred down in Moultrie, Georgia, and Fred's producing queens, and his family's produced queens for a long time. And Fred has been moving, because of small hive beetles and because he wants a little more stable queen unit, to a 5-frame deep nuke for mating queens. Now this is revolutionary in terms of how we approach our queen rearing, and setting these up with a frame of brood, a frame of food, and a queen cell in the spring, and then of course these can be recycled. Well, with Dave Mixa down in Florida, he's able to use a medium depth 3-way box. So that's the size frame here, and these have been in use for, I think he's got 40 years of beekeeping and queen rearing. So you got 3 frames here with feed on it, a divider, 3 frames here, a divider, and 3 frames here. So each section has a queen independent to the other 2, and a queening slitter on top, and a common honey super. So I like this idea. I think this is something that I want to experiment a little bit here in the north when I have time. I guess that's my major issue. And as queens are pulled out, then they can put a queen cell in there, a ripe cell that'll come out in the next 24 hours. So it's a way of managing these bees. If you are using queens or queen cells, you do this in your own operation. You don't have to be doing the mating part, but I think it's important you see how they do it. I like to put queen cells right against the brood so that you see this little cap of honey at the top, and then, or crown of honey, I guess some people call it, and I push that queen cell in. That plastic flange that serves as the base of the queen cell can be pushed up against the brood, but not so tight that you're going to do any damage to the queen cell itself. And a queen cell is about the only thing bees will tolerate in that bee space. They'll tolerate little honey, but they will tolerate that queen cell in there. And if this colony's been queenless for even if half an hour, then you're in pretty good shape as far as the bees responding to her. They won't destroy her or do anything like that. So again, just putting in the cells. One of the things that Shane asked questions about is recognizing when things are not quite normal. And I would suggest to you that this frame indicates there's something that's not quite normal. You look in the bottom of those cells. You see some cells that have pollen. This bright pollen over on the left-hand side is a good indicator that there's been pollen foraging. There's no nectar and there's no brood in this open patch of cells that you see right here. And when it comes to finding the queen, it can be really hard for any beekeeper, but especially a new beekeeper. Can you see the queen on this frame? And if you haven't found her yet, just spend a few more minutes looking for something a little bit different about one bee that's here. And I'll give you a clue. She's partially hidden. So without spending a lot of time, here's the queen right here. Now, what's wrong with that queen? Is there something wrong with this queen? Do I need to go out and order a queen to replace her? We tend to go into panic mode on some of her things, and I'm just going to tell you, relax. Here's a new virgin queen. If she is in the mating process, you know, she hasn't swollen up in her body, so, and the bees are, you know, say that the queen is hiding, but the bees cover her up, so maybe she's being hidden. How's that for splitting hairs? This colony, all of the brood, or most of the brood, is probably already hatched or emerged, and so these bees could be mainly young bees, and I'm guessing this is a colony that's undergoing supersedure, queen replacement, and not swarming, but can't tell from this frame really, or from this shot. So here's that virgin queen. She's crawling around underneath. She's going to be hard to spot. She doesn't have any evidence, and she's going to move pretty darn fast. Virgins tend to be pretty mobile. And in a couple of days, she's going to go out and mate. And when that happens, and she gets all finds all the boy bees she needs, she's going to come back to the hive in 2 or 3 days. Her abdomen's going to swell up. There's a hormone change, and that hormone stimulates her eggs to develop in her abdomen. And in the meantime, the bees are going to polish all these cells. They're going to remove contents. They're going to consume that pollen that you see there that's in the brood nest area. And this is a good indicator that this is a normal process, and I just suggest to beekeepers, and they see something like this and may not see the virgin queen, is to close up at the hive and come back in a couple of days and see if they don't have eggs. And if you can't see eggs, then find somebody who can, because that's going to be your really good indicator. Well, I just had to throw in the shot from Marion Ellis's lab out in Nebraska, where you go out try to find where the mating's going on, and that's queen pheromone. That's not the queen herself in that cage, but if you look carefully, you see half a dozen drones that are flying around that are attracted to this. This is not in a drone congregation area. This is actually in a flyway, and just where bees are going back and forth to the nectar flow. And the drones and the queens seem to use that same flight path. It may be along a woodlot or a fence row or something. And in a drone congregation, you might have hundreds, if not thousands, of drones. And so that queen is going out some distance to find the drones. The drones stay a little bit closer to home, probably a mechanism to prevent inbreeding. And when that queen comes back, it's a virgin queen. This area here with the ovaries is small, and as that hormone kicks in, she starts producing eggs. So here's a laying queen. You see the eggs coming down the median oviduct that come through here. There's a valve fold, and right at this point where the valve fold, there's a duct that comes from this round sphere that's called the spermatheca. And that's where the sperm from all the drones, she might have 5 to 8 million sperm in there, and they're going to release that sperm a little bit at a time. It's been indicated it's a volume, not a number, and then that sperm is fertilized. So if it comes through here, it's fertilized, that'll be a female. And if the egg comes down here and it's not fertilized, because the queen's going to lay in a drone-sized cell, or she's run out of sperm, that will be a male, and or a drone. So this is a good indicator of the activity that's going on in a good queen, and what you want to look at. So just another view of this is from H. Dade from the International Bee Research Association, and just a good idea. The number, an abdomen of a queen is just chock full of eggs. And when I see people picking up queens and they kind of mash them a bit, it worries me that they may be doing some damage, although I'm sure people are worried when I pick up a queen too. So it's a good indicator that you need to be careful. Here's the actual thing. This is from Beltsville Lab, the technicians there that worked for Anita Collins when she was still, before she retired. And here you see the real thing. The ovaries, there are 2 ovaries filled with those ovarioles. The median oviduct, you have the 2 lateral oviducts here, meeting the median oviduct, the spermatheca, and then that's where the queen would deposit that egg into a cell. People ask me, how can you tell if a queen is well mated? And unfortunately, you have to sacrifice the queen to find out. But if you have a queen that you're going to discard anyway because she's not doing, it's always useful to take and look at the spermatheca. Now here's, I think it's David Mix's hands, and here is the spermatheca. That's how small it is. And it's covered with a thin layer of tracheal material, and you have to remove that. Okay, I just lost half of you right there. But once you learn how to do this, and you've got old queens, and or have you, if people save their old queens, you can practice on this and get a hand lens for those of you who are visually challenged, and look, and you see how much sperm there was left. If it's a brown in color, then it indicates there's still sperm there, but it's kind of milky white, or milky white would mean probably the queen is running out of sperm. If it's white, that queen never mated. She's still a virgin. So with mating behavior, of course, you've got to have the drones on hand. And this time of year, you want to make sure that you don't start anything that would involve queen production until the drones are at least the purple-eyed stage. It's larvae, because they take longer to develop. Both in the larval stage, they take 24 days rather than queen at 16. And then they take a little bit longer in terms of their orientation and actually mating. So you figure, at least a week and probably up to a week and a half before drones emerge and start to mate. Well, when you're successful at producing drones, or whoever you buy your queens from has success, then they're going to harvest those queens. Now, here's a little tip from David Mixon that's probably worth the hour you're spending with me tonight. When you have queens that are put into cages, give them a drink of honey. The process of caging queens is probably pretty stressful for the queen. I know it's stressful for you if you're not used to finding queens, but here there's a tray, a bar of these plastic queen cages. Each one of them contains just one queen. She's been laying for several months in this case. This was these were overwintered queens that they had mated back in October of that prior year. And so I was visiting there in early February. So they were taking their first look, for they had started queen rearing in late January, early February. So these queens are being taken out, and there are always people looking for queens, no matter where you are in the world. And so, but David takes these out in these JZBZ cages, and he and his family, and they put the queen in there, and then before they do anything else, they give them a drink of honey. And this allows those queens to feed on that honey. And if you've been told that the queens can't feed themselves, well, it's wrong. They will feed themselves. They don't require it. And while they work those colonies, they're also pulling out frames of brood, and frames with brood and bees on it. And when they carry these bees back and forth, again, this whole idea of keeping queens warm, that they have them at bee temperature, which is going to be around 90, 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And so here you have the queens just set on the bottom of this carrier box, which is nothing more than a standard brood box. He's using medium, I think, but you can carry these boxes in. He's got a lid on there. But these queens that are being taken back to the shop are all well fed. Even though there are worker bees on there that will feed them, that feeding happens immediately. And I think that's something we all need to keep in mind when we handle queens, is we got to give them a little taste of honey. Not a lot. We don't want to drown them in that honey. And I've seen people go at it like they're going to, marinate those poor queens. That's not what you want. Well, I asked about finding queens and queen introduction, and 64% of you can find a queen. 36% cannot, according to the survey that we just did. And so finding queens is a challenge. So one of the things about introducing a new queen is you got to find the old queen, right? But introducing queens isn't as bad as it sounds. So here's a wood and screen cage with bees on it. And this is typical of what you get many packages in, especially from California, what some people call the California cage. And then you have the plastic push-in cage that some of the supply people sell. And you can run the queen in there and put this cage right over a area of brood that's about to emerge or is in the process of emerging. So now your queen bee is in there, and she's new to this colony. You're able to let her acclimate to the colony, and you see there's this ventilated area where the bees are able to get access to bees outside the cage. But if young bees are emerging inside that cage, they're feeding the queen, they're grooming her, and it's just a good thing. And I like to use push-in cages and delayed release. I let these queens come out for 3 to 5 days later for an average queen. If she's a really pricey queen, I'd even wait even longer. And this really helps with introduction. So here's a queen that's laying, but I just want to show you, these are some homemade cages for introduction, and these are just made out of hardware cloth and little blocks of wood, and looks like they've been used for a long time by the amount of propolis there. And it's just a way of having queens introduced. This is why it's the shape it is. This will fit between 2 frames of brood, and it doesn't interfere with the size of the or the spacing of the frames. It's another photo I got from Dewey Karen. Some people have gone to various systems in queen rearing, and they may have some of these plastic, I call them a hair curler cage, but you've got a wood plug here. You can have candy up here and the queen in here. You can have with or without worker bees. I like them without, but if you have a queen in a cage without workers, then you've got a carrier and a container where there are workers present, so that she's being well cared for. But again, this whole issue of temperature and maintaining quality is important. So I would put this queen in between 2 frames and come back in 3 to 5 days, and if it's got a cork or a plug in it, take that off. If it's got another device, then you have to remove it so the queen can be released when you're not there. Here's one of the JZBZ cages. This is what I use. These are pretty standard now, and you see this pink cap at the bottom. We've got queen candy we've made. Queen candy is just powdered sugar and honey we mix up cold and work it with our hands until it's got the right consistency, and it should break apart rather than stretch out like taffy. There's a queen in here, and worker bees are attracted to her, and we use this to introduce both virgin queens and mated queens. Now with virgin queens, you never want to direct release that queen, because she is a virgin queen and she hasn't flown and she still wants to mate. She'll take off and leave, and you've lost that queen. We put these cages in. This may have been brood, but it's now a frame of honey. You can see it's been there for a while with all the propolis on there, and it doesn't do any harm, I guess, to leave these cages in. But this is how I position a queen cage. We've got notes to ourselves on what queen this happened to be that we introduced. So we take the cap off this end, there's candy in here, and close everything up, come back in a couple of days and see if the queen is laying. And if she's laying fine, we'll just close this out, colony up, and leave them go for a while. Well, queen finding, a lot of you have trouble with queen finding, and it's always a challenge. And I just use this shot. It's not necessarily indicating the queen colony, or the finding aspect, but it's how you look at the frame. And it's, as you work a colony, I like to start from the second frame from the edge, not the first one. Take that second frame out, remove it, look very carefully at the occupants on that frame, look for the queen, look for the thickness of the body of the queen, and I rotate this around quite often corner to corner. And I do this while it's being held over the colony, so if the queen does happen to fall off, she'll fall into her own colony. And so if I take the second one out, and I would have taken this one out, then I would take out the first one and have another box to set these frames into, or very carefully prop them up on the side of the comb. It's, the side of the hive. And then work through the entire colony And as you do it, look at the next frame. When you take this frame out, you look at this one to see where the queen is. And she might be on the next frame kind of running away from you. Some queens are afraid of the light or, negatively phototropic. What is the word? Anyway, they're moving away from you and they're going to hide from you. So that helps you with this queen finding. If you have a colony which has multiple boxes of brood, and you really have to find the queen, and of course I always ask why, but if you really have to find that queen, then you may want to put a queen excluder between each box of brood and come back in 5 days, 4 or 5 days, because then all of the eggs that are in the area that doesn't have a queen will have hatched, so you'll have no eggs. This assumes, of course, you could see an egg. If you can't see eggs, get some help. You really need to work on this. If you cannot see eggs, you need to do that. That's one of the things that's important. So to find the queen, you want to isolate her as much as you can to a few frames, 8, 9, or 10 frames, depending on how you run your bees, and then look through these very systematically. Go from one side to the other, and then put them back in. And if you don't see them in that manipulation, I frankly say, okay, it's time to close up the hive. We've spent enough time. We're going to come back and we're going to look at these bees in 2 or 3 days. If you're in a big hurry, or you won't be back for a while, which is usually my case, then you may have to shake the bees into a box with a queen excluder, smoke the bees down, and hopefully that queen will be on that queen excluder when the bees have all gone through it, and you can pick her off there. It's a lot of work and not what most new beekeepers want to be involved with. So let's talk about some queen problems and things that go on there. And this isn't a queen problem, but it reflects one. This was one of my hives last fall, and we have a lot of drones. And it's a little bit scary when you open up a hive and all the other colonies have thrown their drones out, and you have a colony that's pretty well loaded with drones, because it indicates that there's no queen in that colony. So without going any further, if this is where the brood's supposed to be and I don't see any brood, then this tells me that this colony is queenless. And late in the season, this may be because we had poor mating, and we had a lot of poor mating last August and September. And so this is probably one of the indicators. They have honey, but they have virtually no pollen that I can see, and they got a lot of boy bees there, which is good if you're trying to get mating, but it doesn't work. If you have a small area of brood, you want to look at it very carefully to determine if this is worker or if this is drone brood. Are there multiple eggs in there or not? So you're going to have to get down and look in those very carefully. I think this is all worker. This is just a new queen that's just starting to lay. But here we have a drone layer. This is a queen that is laying unfertilized eggs. And there may be a disease involved here. Now you can see that these cells stick out further than what you would normally expect them to. So this is an indicator of a viable queen that's either never mated or she's run out of sperm. Or I guess the third option might be she's had some chemical exposure and she's been sterilized. So the sperm have been killed, and so she's producing this. So this is an indicator that I would like to use, and a lot of you had trouble. 26% of you said you're successful at finding or recognizing drone-laying colonies. So, by the way, that thunder I promised you is coming. It's in the background right now. So this is a dramatic moment, right? And we want to keep our eyes open for this sort of thing, because if you've got a queen in there and she's producing pheromone and otherwise is in pretty good shape, but she's not fertilized, you've got to get her out of there or combine this colony, take the queen out, dispose of her. You can do that spermatheca check, find out what was really going on, or get somebody who can do it, check it for you. And I really, really recommend that people do that. And we don't see much of that, getting people to help them out with some of these problem diagnoses. But it just answers a lot of questions. So here's a drone laying queen. This is the queen bee that's doing this. It's not the workers. This is the queen. Now compare that to this shot, and here you've got some multiple eggs at the bottom of the cell, and this is usually an indication of laying workers. Now, what's confusing about this is that some of these cells look pretty good, but you got a larvae here, and you got an egg there, you got 2 eggs here, 2 eggs, but they tend to be at the bottom of the cells. So this may be an indicator of a queen that's just putting multiple eggs at the bottom. So a viable queen, but she's just doing some strange stuff, messing with you a little bit. Here is a colony that's from laying workers, and there are multiple eggs in here. Not the traditional multiple eggs, but it is an indicator of some problems. So for laying workers, and you might have hundreds if not thousands of laying workers in the colony, it really gets to be, I'll just go back to that one, a challenge to try to recognize some of the things going on. So while it may look pretty good, those multiple eggs, but more important are these eggs that are on the side of the cones. When they're not quite positioned where they should be, that's a good indicator that you've got a worker bees that are laying eggs and they can't reach all the way down. All right. So when to requeen? When you want to requeen a colony? Well, I always say that you run a requeen when you're not happy with a colony. Maybe they're a bit defensive. Maybe this queen is not doing what you want in terms of production. Some of these queens take themselves out of the gene pool by producing colonies that die during the winter or of some other factors. But when you look at each queen, you can't tell by looking at her whether or not she's any good, unless, of course, she's got a physical deformity. She's crippled and, limping or something like that. So it's a decision you have to make about when you replace the queen and how you want to approach this, and make sure you've got good viable queens in your colony and they're doing a good job. So I'm going to stop right there, and actually that's the second part of the talk that's on this program on history of queen rearing, but we're not going to take time on that, Shane. I think let's open it up to questions and see what is on the minds of the people listening.
All right. Just let me pull up my question panel here and see what we've got coming through. We've got, we do have quite a few. Here's a question about sort of not necessarily specific sources for queens, but how best to go about, I guess, stocking your own apiary. If I buy queens, should I get them from different suppliers or just get them all from one?
Well, I think my answer to that is how many colonies do you have? If you have 1 or 2 colonies, and of course I recommend at least 2, they can be from one source, just to make it easier on yourself. On the other hand, if you've got 200 colonies, I would try to have 4 or 5 different suppliers for those queens, partially because you want to evaluate their genetic components. They may be some of yours that you've been breeding that you want to try to build them up, but also don't put all your eggs in one basket, and that includes the sources of these queens. And some of the biggest errors I think people have made along the line of buying all the queens from one person, and if 10% of them are bad, then 10% of all your bees are bad. But if 50% of those queens are bad, have something wrong with them, now 50% of your colonies are at risk. So mix it up a little bit.
Can you, there's a couple questions here about sort of the mating process of a queen. Can you sort of just quickly run through that? Let's say you've got a cell and that virgin queen emerges. Can you just quickly run through that process of what happens over the next week or two?
With a newly emerged virgin queen, she's going to spend a couple of days being fed, running around in the hive. She is producing pheromone. She actually produces pheromone before she emerges. The bees recognize that queen pheromone in those queen cells, and that's probably one reason why they don't tear them down, because they smell the developing queen there. And if there are other queens in the colony, she's going to probably engage them in battle. If they're sisters, if her mother's still alive, if it's a mother-daughter situation, they don't fight. They, quite often, this time of year, you'll find more than one queen in colonies, and it's a mother-daughter situation. But that young queen is going to, if she's not going to be a part of a swarming scenario, then she's going to go out and make orientation flights, and somewhere between 5 and 10 days, she's going to go out on her mating flights, try to find the number of drones she needs to mate with, which we see now estimates anywhere from 10 to 60. And so she's going to come back from those mating flights. These flights may be over several days, multiple flights in one day. Each flight she should hopefully mate with multiple drones in fairly rapid succession. And then she's able to come back to the hive. She may have what's the beekeepers call the mating sign, which is the, if you will, the last, the remnants of the last drone's body in her body. And she's going to be quiet in the colony. She's going to kind of slow down a little bit. The bees are going to feed her, groom her, massage her to work out these extra spermatozoa that she has. And in about 3 days, she'll start laying eggs. And now she'll be laying eggs for the normal brood cycle for the rest of her life. And that's what you want. So from, it takes about 16 days for that queen to go through its larval development, the egg larvae pupae, and then add another, say, 12 days on before you see any signs of eggs. So 16 plus 12, that's 28 days. So that's 4 weeks if you let bees raise their own queen. It's a minimum of 4 weeks before you see any eggs being produced. So if you're going to let bees produce their own queens, that's the cost. You lose that month of time in terms of what's going on. On the other hand, some people like to maintain that genetic diversity of having their own queens in there. So I think that answers kind of a thumbnail sketch.
Yes. You talked about a laying worker, and you mentioned that there could be hundreds, perhaps thousands of laying workers in a colony. And so there's the question that we get asked all the time, and I'm sure you do as well, so I'll pose it to you now. What do you do with a colony that's got a laying workers?
Workers, yeah.
How do you fix it?
A lot of old-time beekeepers think there was one worker bee laying all those eggs. She doesn't have the egg-laying equipment. That big fat queen I showed the picture of, you compare that with a worker bee, she's got 1 or 2 of those ovarioles, and she can produce 1 or 2 eggs per day. So she's certainly not going to fill up the brood nest with those eggs. What's more important, I think, is we understand the sequence that goes on in producing these worker bees that produce eggs. First of all, the queen bee, as I think most beekeepers realize, is inhibiting the production of eggs by her daughters and early on with her sisters by producing pheromone. And that pheromone from the queen has an inhibitory effect. But what's more important, I think, is perhaps the odor or the pheromones coming from worker brood. And that worker brood pheromone is very important in suppressing the egg laying of worker bees. So if you will, if you go into a colony and you take the queen out and prevent them from raising a queen by going in perhaps and cutting out any queen cells, we know we've got 21 days that there will be brood emergence from the time you remove that queen. Then it takes about another week for the odor of both the queen, of course, and the odor of the brood to dissipate and allow those worker bees to start producing their own eggs. So about, again, another convenient thing to remember, about 4 weeks after the removal of a queen, you'll start seeing the appearance of these rogue eggs, these eggs on the side, and the multiple eggs, beside the cells on multiple eggs. So then to answer your question, what do you do? Well, two schools of thought at least. And one of them does not involve shaking the bees in the bushes. That doesn't do any good. One approach is to simply take the colony you have and get out a piece of newspaper and stack it on top of another hive. Take your losses up front because it could be pretty frustrating. The worst thing you can do is go out and buy a queen, introduce her in there, and they will reject her almost automatically. And it's the power, I think, it's gone to the head of those worker bees. They don't want to do ruler. The only way I've had any success, and it's a low success rate, maybe under 30–40%, is to take a worker brood from another colony, put it in that hive, leave it for several days, and hope that that pheromone from the worker brood is going to suppress the egg-laying instinct. You can check on this. And then, and only then, would you introduce a queen from somewhere else. It's a lot of work. And and it's a lot more common than what most people want to admit, that we have problems with queen failure, or in my case, I forgot where I took the queen out of and didn't get a replacement in there in time. And so you really have to be careful with it. Okay?
Here's another one that we often wrestle with, and that's the best time to requeen a colony.
Time
Any
of day
thoughts?
or time of year?
Time of year. And hey, why not throw in time of day too? Sure.
Well, I don't think it makes any difference in time of day. So
Okay.
we'll get that off the list. When you can get your bees, and I'll put a stipulation on that. When bees are not robbing each other, you don't want to try to requeen or introduce a queen when there's robbing going on, because that just sets up a whole set of behaviors, and the bees are a little nasty. As far as a philosophy about when to requeen, I'm pretty much in the school of thought now in my own experience about you want to requeen by making nukes, making up your own increased colonies, and you really want to do that when the bees are naturally producing queen cells. So that means in your swarm season, and just after that, the swarm season into your nectar flow. Don't wait until all the nectar's dried up and do it during the middle of your dearth period when there are no drones left and the bees are fighting each other with robbing. That's just the worst possible time to do it. So I guess I'm answering by isolating that window of opportunity down to good bee conditions, good nectar flow, build up, and try not to be a hero and make your bees do things they don't really want to do. Yes, you could do a lot of feeding and stimulation, trying to get bees to accept new queens, but I would really like to see more and more people trying to make up those nukes we've talked about in the previous couple of sessions that we've had. Make up a nuke or 2 or 10 or 200, whatever you got, and put in those queen cells, those virgins, those mated queens. Again, that's your call, your choice, and kind of grow from there. Do it during the time of year when the bees instinctively want to swarm and are on a nectar flow, and I think that's going to give you the best results. Remember, with swarm colonies, when colonies swarm, that old queen, if she goes with the swarm, she doesn't last forever. She's going to be replaced. And when do the bees replace her? Well, they replace her during the nectar flow. And I think that should be a pretty strong indicator of a natural time to do this particular task and take the old queen out with a new colony. And of course, some people, the whole prospect of going through a strong colony during a nectar flow and taking out a queen, that's not what I'm recommending. I'm recommending you do this by making up these nukes and requeen there, and then either combining and taking out the old queen later, or letting the queens fight them out if you combine a strong colony with a nuke, and hopefully they'll make the right decision.
I've got one last question for you. We've got several other questions that unfortunately we don't have time for. We're a little bit past 7 o'clock now, but I want to pose this one as it's something that I think is an evolving topic, and that is, what are your thoughts on how many years a queen is viable? And I'll I'll rephrase that a little bit by saying, how often do you think you should requeen your colony?
I'm pretty well locked into replacing queens every year or every 2 years. Last year we saw a lot of swarming, and so the bees replaced those queens without my vote. Even though we thought we were on top of things, we were not. Last year everything seemed to want to swarm. I have had conversations about this with people like Joel Atshaw, the Ohio queen breeder, and he respects those 3-year-old queens for genetic information, but he's going to produce queens from them because they're carrying genes for longevity. For a lot of us, we're going to be fighting with the battle of keeping our colonies strong and healthy, fighting varroa mites, which I think is still our biggest problem in this country, other than, perhaps pesticides now trying to rival that. So we're really, really best off to keep our queens as young as we can, and 1 or 2 years for a queen, I think it's good, and just have those backup queens in those nukes, folks, and you're going to have the success you want because you've got the replacement on site. She's at work, she's laying, and I'm impressed with what some people are doing now over wintering nukes and having good success with that. So I know it's a little bit more work and it's sort of stretching the limit for people, but it's worth the effort. So appreciate that.
All right. Well, we've exceeded our time limit here this evening. I thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. And Larry, I thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure, your wealth of information, and we'll have to do more of these in the future.
Well, good. And just, the risk of being advertising genius here, check out the website. We got a couple of queen rearing classes coming up, and there's room in both of them. 3 of them, I think we've got, well, 2 of them we have room. One I'm going to do here in the farm in June 1st and 2nd, and then we're doing a Virginia program